Listenable.
Right there, actually.
Oh, don't worry about centering yourself.
Did that mess with you?
I will recenter you. It's fine. It's fine. We're professionals here.
My bad. It's better for me because at least I can put you right under the camera.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. And but yeah, welcome to Quest Board Gaming episode 2 on YouTube, episode 2 and 3 in the podcast form of this. My name is Steve. I am with my wonderful gaming friend and companion here, Brandon. Let's get that angle right. There we go. I'll do it with the other hand. Nope. There we go. Oh. I can point in a gesturing direction. But
I'm trying to
beautiful
remember which
Brandon.
way you are. You are.
Nope. The other way. Way in the other way in the thing in the stream. Yep. I've got us backwards. Anyway, only to add confusion. Right. Only to add confusion. Questboard Gaming is a live stream about all things tabletop RPGs. This is not just Dungeons and Dragons and Pathfinder and Starfinder. This is Merkborg. This is Kids on Bikes. This is OSR. This is whatever in the tabletop space, and maybe eventually a board game or two, as we so seem fit. But mostly the little with the dice and the figures and or the cards and the improv and the whatnot. And we just talk about topics. Brandon and I play in my longest ever running campaign through the mill here on Dying of Exposure's YouTube, and we love playing tabletop together, and we love talking it. We're up late at night all the time doing it.
We've
so
been
why not here?
playing games together now for several years, which is awesome.
Yeah.
I will drop a teaser though. In October, I will be getting my Kickstarter for Darkest Dungeon, the board game.
Oh, we're going to be talking about that because we're going to be playing it. I think
we should probably have you come up in person, do a recording of that when we play it.
Yeah, because I fucking love that game, and I'm here for that board game, and I'm here for the sequel, Darkest Dungeon 2. I'm here for everything Darkest Dungeon I can get my hands on.
So that's just a teaser for what will come up probably in late October.
You know what'll be good about playing Darkest Dungeon, the board game, Brandon? This is how good I am at segues. Brace yourself. Is that we can take ideas from the Darkest Dungeon board game and then adapt them into role-playing games that we ourselves run and participate in the tabletop function, modifying them so that they fit and grabbing little bits and pieces of the lore. And that is what I consider, at least, one aspect of homebrew, which is what at least the first part of this will be about. Maybe the whole thing. We don't know. But I always have we have two topics. Maybe we'll get to both of them. Maybe this will just be homebrew. I
mean, homebrew is a big subject.
Yeah, so...
And
Go on.
One of the things I think about when we talk about homebrew is we kind of divide them into two broad categories. We have generic homebrew, which is just used to be like, the rules of this aren't quite where we want them to be. We want to adjust the overall game.
Yeah, just like nudge it a little bit.
Just to nudge it in a general direction of a slightly better experience. And then there is specific homebrew that is geared to change the game mechanically to achieve specific themes and settings, so that like you, depending on the type of campaign you're running, one type of homebrew will work in a dark, gritty setting, but not in a lighthearted, spirited, role-play heavy campaign. So I think the first ones we should talk about are kind of more the generic, like broad,
the little nudges, the
things that help steer the game in the right direction.
I have to introduce you to a third pillar of homebrew, which a lot of people don't think about as homebrew because so much of it is, and it integrates both of the first two you talk to, but it's very much what I do and what I think a lot of DMs do, which is I've made my own world narratively, fully, and all of it is homebrew. If you might use different species or different things from different properties, but like the plot you create, the story you run in a very real way, you are making that up at home. Now a lot of people be like, well, that's just standard tabletop, but there is so many published adventures and things like that I would make an argument that you could make the argument that if I just wrote story hooks that were system non-specific and publish that, it would be a third-party publish and you could call it homebrew. I think that's a fair enough thing to call homebrew, because homebrew kind of has become a giant umbrella term for, is it published in an official rulebook or supplement to said official rulebook? No, then it's probably homebrew in some fashion or another. But that's more I think that's the homebrew that is less transferably consumable to talk about versus what we're gonna mostly focus on, which is like rules and like systems and like nudges and stuff like that, which is a little bit more helpful for people to be like, oh, that's a good idea, I'm gonna take that and use it in my game, and everything, versus like narrative points, which are a little bit more like so varied and so subjective that it's really hard to like nail that down.
And then in that case, you may end up having a mechanic in your game that shows up as like a one-time deal to deal with, to handle a specific circumstance. Yeah, exactly. For example, when I ran Curse of Strahd, and I believe this was before you got to join our game when we were playing that, we had a sequence where the characters were all being forced to ride onto the side of a speeding carriage as it was fleeing from a pack of wolves and a handful of werewolves. And so there's no mechanic in D&D for such a scenario. So you just kind of have to like put something together. So I had like a picture of a carriage, and there was a bunch of different regions on the carriage that people could be, grabbed onto and do certain things from those perspectives. But that's a very specific one. So people should be, thinking like, oh, you don't have, if you have an idea for how something should be done, you shouldn't necessarily be confined strictly to rules as written. But I kind of want to bring up one of my favorite recent homebrew rules. Because of,
now, is this a nudge or is this a system?
This is a nudge. This is a nudge. So and I think most of our house rules we're going to be talking about today are going to mostly be D&D specific.
D20 at the very least, D20
at the very least. And that is how technically rules is written in 5e. If you roll a nat 20 on a skill check, that is not necessarily a success.
Yeah.
And if you roll a nat 1, it is not necessarily a failure. And of course, that has been changed
Absolutely.
in at least the new 1D&D testing kit. And I'm not a fan of either of those things. I feel like there's a middle ground.
Yeah, definitely.
Where if you have, if you want to reward a nat 20 and you want to make a nat 1 a little more punishing, but you don't want to cripple those things so severely. You don't want to punish someone so severely for a 1 or reward someone so significantly for a 20.
Certainly.
That it undoes character choice or character building choice.
Yeah.
And so my response to this is that on a nat 1 or a nat 20, you subtract or add a d6 respectively. And what that does is it does nudge people towards getting a bonus or a penalty for those things. So getting that nat 20 or nat 1 still feels significant without necessarily breaking character choice. I like it because of, let's say, like you're talking about a really obscure piece of arcana knowledge, right?
Yeah.
There's no way that barbarian who is going to know it, even if he rolls a nat 20. There's just not a 5% chance
that they know the bit of lore. Yeah.
Is going to know some really obscure ancient piece of lore. But a wizard who has studied magic his entire life, maybe he stumbled upon that. And there's still the slimmest of chances that they could get there at an early level. Much better chance, obviously, later on, once those skill points start getting higher, that they could possibly get to that high DC goal. And of course, this works better specifically under 5th edition because of it has the bounded accuracy.
Yeah.
Systems like Pathfinder, where they don't have bounded accuracy, where they let numbers and bonuses stack significantly higher, probably wouldn't get as much of a benefit from this. And if you're looking to reward those kind of systems still, you may even entertain the idea of exploding d20s. Where if you roll a 20, you get to roll again. Of course, that's like, once again, probably something more appropriate for Pathfinder when you're getting those really high modifiers.
Yeah, we're number stack. I like it. I'm a big please put me on the spot and make me figure out how your character knows this thing. A person as a lore, it's my favorite thing. I like the dice to punish me when I'm running a game, and so I like a nat 20, a 5% chance kind of thing. I agree with you that it makes no logical sense for, say, a barbarian from outside of a region that's never interfaced with any of the lore of a region to know anything about that region, and you could really narrate yourself into a hole as a GM, being like, this is a dead society that's been dead for 2,000 years, so it's not like they could have even met someone from that region, right, or anything like that. You can really narrate it, but I love those panic moments as a GM, because I do so much improving and so much just like inventing on the spot that it's where I live. But that can be extremely frustrating if you're either A, not comfortable with that style, B, relatively new, or C, have a lot of players at the table, because oftentimes at your table in like a D20 system, you're going to have a group be like, do any of us recognize this? And it'll be like, roll a history check or a survival check, whatever the appropriate check is. And then 8 people will roll it. And that means that 5% chance is happening 8 times, which means someone's probably very likely to hit a nat 20 by pure statisticals, and so you might have to be constantly doing that. I prefer honestly, 6 is my cap. I prefer games of 5 and fewer, and I usually prefer with tables directing it to sort of narrative. Like as the GM, I just say, no, you haven't experienced it. Like there's no way you would know that, and that's another way that I address it. But what I like about it is that it is kind of agnostically implied, and it always does give, like, it meets it in the middle, because so many people on skill checks give 1s and 20s nothing, because that's 5e rules as written, and I don't think that's fun, because we like seeing the 20, because it comes up.
Rolling the dice is a part of the game, and we want the rolling the dice to be fun.
We want it to be fun, and I think a lot of homebrew rules. Hold on, just a moment. This is incredibly unfortunate. There we go. We want the super professional. What we want is the we want a lot of the like little nudge rules are to try and satisfy the fact that when you get a 20 as a player who might roll, if there's a combat several more times, but in like a 3-hour gaming session, you might only roll, a half dozen to like a dozen times through the whole session, right? You want those 20s and 1s to count, because they're not going to come up. And then from a DM or GM perspective, on a D20 system, you're getting 20s and 1s all the time, because you're rolling dice constantly, just constantly. And that multiplies in a combat, because you're usually rolling for a ton of enemies and other things and environmental effects and stuff. And so we want to kind of respect that. But I like that kind of meet in the middle, where it's like, I'm going to give you something, but I have a reason that I don't think that I would rather this not be a part of it, unless you can verbally convince me as a player that you should know about this. And then things like, other D20 systems usually have something along the line of advantage and disadvantage to address. Is this in my wheelhouse that the DM can dole out to give you a more likely chance of success anyway? So it'd be like, okay, you can roll it, it'll still be the plus the minus plus 6 kind of concept, D6, but like it'll be like, but you get to roll it with advantage because it is in your wheelhouse, and you would know, you've narrated to me why your character would know this. And so I think it's a nice meet in the middle. I wanted to bring up my absolute favorite thing to do in combat as my nudge play, and I got this. High rollers didn't invent this, but that's where I got it from, and it is how I do crits in combat, and I love it because of the swing. It is something I highly recommend never having a paladin get lucky with, but it'll happen. Maybe it'll change up in 1D&D. The crit attack, that if someone gets a nat 20 on an attack, roll, they do max damage plus a dice roll. And I love that because it swings it wild. And later in combat, that number goes bananas. You sneak attack, any dice they roll, just like a crit, rather than just doubling the amount of dice they roll, they get max damage plus their normal roll. And that means that a crit is always more damage than anything else. And the reason I'm fine with that is because I know that's part of the combat, and also my monsters can do it to players. My enemies can do it to the players. Go on.
As a player in your games, I also really love this particular house rule. It is just always satisfying to really get that big damage number.
Oh, and reflexively for saving throws, for the casters out there, because, a lot of casters, it's mostly saving throws. Reflexively for the saving throws, if my enemies get nat 1s on the saving throw, same rule applies as a crit hit, where it's like, all right, you're going to do max damage plus, and if they get a nat 20, they then quarter the damage, and it's the same for the players. If they get a nat 1, It's critical fail. It's the only time I actually punish a critical failure is in combat. I don't do it on skill checks, other than you just don't get to do the thing you wanted to do. Maybe a little flavor text, but nothing too harsh. But yeah, same thing for the players. If they get a nat 1, they're going to take that big extra damage on a save throw. If they get a nat 20, they're going to take quarter damage or less if they have like resistances, or of course nothing if it's, you know, something that doesn't do damage on half. But like really trying to really always make that 20 and that 1 count. But that battle swing on 5e, especially if you're looking at the immunities, looking at the resistances, looking at the legendary actions, and have built your combat knowing that likely if you have 4 or 5 players in a combat, someone's gonna crit, right? Someone's probably gonna crit. If you know that, that gets them them in there, really swinging the combat, and it gives you really early big hits on successes, like at level 3 when you're only doing, you know, 1d8 plus like 5 or something like that. You're like, okay, I get to do 13 plus a d8. That might be 20 damage. That will straight up knock most level 3 regular enemies that they're gonna run into like onto the ground, possibly knock them all the way out, right? It's really satisfying. It gives you a lot of power up front, and then wild power at later levels, which I just love. I love to see a paladin smite on a crit and just do like 150 damage in a swing and just crush it, because by the time you're level 15 you're a god, so you might as well do godlike stuff. You're at least a superhero. You're definitely close to that.
We have someone in our chat, Tim Gracie, right now, who's bringing up some points about how they like that like Pathfinder has confirmation of crits, because of they don't like, and this is actually a pretty great point, that a barbarian or a fighter have the same chance to crit per attack as a wizard with a stick. And that there's a bit of verisimilitude being broken there by being like, oh, this wizard has a chance to hurt this guy really badly with a stick as much as a fighter who is
trained in the blade,
trained in the ways of fighting. And then we also have to remember that the fact that the fighter rolls so many attacks can be a double-edged sword, because they have as many times as more opportunities to roll those nat 1s.
And more opportunities to roll those crits. Also, they can extend their crit range with feats a lot of times too.
The champion can.
You can also. I thought you can take a feat that gives you a 19 on it.
I don't know about that feat. I haven't
whatever the comparative to sharpshooter is. Weapon master.
You're gonna have to. When you're talking about when you're talking about like dice rolling, that's like a whole a complicated thing. Because like, you talk about like rolling that nat 20 is really exciting moment at the table, right? Yeah. And I think Pathfinder has like this way of handling it. Pathfinder 2. I don't know if you're familiar with how their rules for crits and fails work.
Yeah. The swing 10. I want to say like 10 over.
And then if you roll a nat 20, it also increases the tier of your success by 1 level. Yeah. So let's say you're attacking a guy with a 22 AC, right? Someone's calling me now, but I can't answer this call. So let's say you get that like nat 20, but you don't even have any bonus to your attack roll, because you're like a wizard with an unarmed attack, right? And then rather than let's say not meeting that target's AC, you're technically at just a regular failure. But because you got that nat 20, it increases you up to a standard success. So you at least get to land that hit. Yeah. And if let's say you were above that, when you're hitting that tier above, let's say you actually met the AC with a nat 20, it does actually still take you to the critical success.
Yeah. So there's
a lot of nuance in there. And the weird thing about that though is that there becomes a lot of little tiny nuts and bolts that you have to remember, and so that's also like a hard thing to balance with rules.
Yep.
Is how many nuts and bolts are we going to have?
I love a subtle nudge. There's another rule, and it's to address revivify in 5e. Because it's very easy to bring people back up in 5e from when they die after a certain level. If you have a character with Revivify in your party, permanent death is not a problem. And of course, as a GM, you could just be like, Revivify doesn't exist in the world. Done. And it's asked and answered, right? And you can do that and discuss that with your players that are joining the game beforehand and being like, hey, I want death to really be a little bit more threatening. So just let you know, the way we play it at our table is Revivify doesn't exist, right? And everything, or discuss it in a session 0. But but like taking it and limiting it was a real simple or a simple structure with Revivify, which is that you do Revivify, and then every time you have to roll death saves in D&D after that, if you've been revivified once, you only get 2 death saves instead of 3 failures before you permanently die. And if you get revivified twice, you only get 1, and then you're just not every time you get knocked down, you just instantly die. So the party still has full access to this spell, but if somebody dies several times, it becomes harder and harder to bring them back, and more costly. And it means that eventually, when they knock down, their soul is left. You can create all kinds of rules to do that, but the idea of doing that is fairly simple.
Pretty much Pathfinder 2e's mechanic.
Yeah.
Pathfinder 2e has a mechanic like that with people getting downed, and they have a dying status that even after you've been brought back up, you have that dying 1, and then you get downed again, it becomes dying 2, and then every time you get a failed saving throw, also while dying, that number goes up 1. And so in their game, you have to get to dying 5 to actually die.
But yeah, and then this way, there in theory wouldn't be in this method, which I heard via a NADPOD stream. It isn't what they use in their world, but it was something in one of their Patreon type streams where people submitted homebrew. This one, it's like, yeah, Revivify never goes away. But like, how many times, if somebody gets knocked down all the time and just has to be revivified each time now because they can't be healed up anymore, how effective are they in battle, right? And then so like it really kind of changes it without changing it. But yeah, no, you're gonna see that a lot too. I love how much homebrew in 5e is like, what do we like from Pathfinder? How can this work in 5e? And I imagine, having never played Pathfinder 2.0 myself or 1.0, I imagine it goes the same way, where they're like, this is a little more complicated in Pathfinder than I want it, or I've got like a lot of 5e players, so I'm gonna kind of put a little seasoning of the 5e mechanics, since they're both D20 systems and they're both spawns of 3, D&D 3 and 3.5. Confirmation 20s was the name of the game. I think it was the name of the game in 4e too, rules is written. I think it was 5e that was the one that ditched it.
Mechanically, I understand confirmation crits. I just don't like them thematically.
Yeah, I don't like taking away from that D20 initial moment. Yeah. I rolled a 20 and I'm excited.
The moment you get that D20 and then you roll, and then you have to roll a number 20 to see if you actually get the benefit of that D20 is always like, damn. Because you get that fit, and then you're like, oh man, it just kind of like it's just a regular roll.
Give me another homebrew nudge that you like. Give me another juicy morsel, Brandon.
So this is a bit bigger of a nudge, but I do this because I feel like there is, we remember from 3.5 there was what we called feat taxes, which were feats you had to take to make your character viable.
Okay,
like you just had to take them.
Yeah,
like power shot and power attack. In 5e it's great weapon master and sharpshooter.
Yeah.
Those are essential.
Yeah, they're pretty heavily encouraged feats.
And so what I do is I make it so that, and this is actually a mechanic that I got from Treant Monk, is that if you are proficient with a weapon, you can take the -5 to get +10 to damage.
And then that
doesn't matter.
No feat needed.
But you only can do that whilst taking the attack action, so it doesn't apply to bonus attacks.
Mm-hmm. Like offhandies or reaction attacks.
It only covers attacks made whilst taking the attack action.
Yeah.
It doesn't, and so that means you can't use it with Booming Blade because you're casting a spell.
Yep.
You have to be taking the attack action. And then what I do with Sharpshooter and Great Weapon Master is those ones still let you add those bonuses to your bonus attacks, and you also get the benefit of, like, Great Weapon Master lets you do a bonus attack on a crit. Sharpshooter lets you ignore cover, and then what I do to those things to make them still appealing, because they're not giving quite the significant bonus that they did previously, is I treat them like half feats where you get a +1 to strength or dexterity
or dex or whatever is the appropriate thing. Yeah, no, I'm with you on that one. I like that a lot because it really it eliminates and I know this about you because you've addressed this, and obviously Dungeons and Dragons figured this, Wizards of the Coast figured this out too. There are so many feats in the world, or in the game of D&D, that you kind of end up definitively taking if you're playing that class, because it's just the most obvious thing, and it feels really underpowered when you don't take them, and trying to prevent those from being so necessary so that you can expand the variety of things you can do as a player, and reducing it. And so you're a big fan. Well before the 1D&D thing, you talked to me about the whole just give them a feat right out the gate, right? Just give people a feat right out the gate. There's lots of homebrew that does, like, at the levels that you would take feats or ability score increases, you just take both. You just get both, and everything like that, just to let people, like, mix it up more. And I love that because I love a homebrew that pushes for variety. Homebrews that push for variety and choice are the best kind of homebrews, in my opinion, because they're pretty. They encourage me to like think about it and relook at the list, rediscover things that I may assume I already know because I've played a paladin 17 times, so I know what a paladin needs feat wise, and I'm just gonna pick those because if I don't have them, I'm gonna be pissed at myself later because they make my character less effective.
I mean, when was the last time you saw a sword and board fighter that was actually valid at a table?
Always a two-hander, always a two-hand weapon,
right? And by adding this as a feature for everyone who, with whatever weapons they're proficient with, suddenly now, like, that sword and board fighter, he may not be able to hit as hard as a great weapon like as a guy with a two-handed axe doing great weapon master, but he can still hit pretty damn hard.
Yep.
And doesn't become like obsolete.
Yeah.
And then suddenly by doing that, you're also making a lot of other feats way more
clerics. Sorry, I saw Tim post up clerics while we were discussing this, and yes, clerics are a tanky AC class that tends to not rely as much on their ability to hit you, so a lot of them get shielded on.
It depends on which subclass too, because if you're playing like a freaking storm cleric, you can I think that's what you want to go for those big hits too.
I think that's what Triple A Ron plays, and he fights with an anchor. Because it's an anchor. It's just a giant great hammer, but it's an anchor. And everything. I want to talk about moving a little bit from nudge to burgeoning on system, because I have a great homebrew idea that I think a lot of tables use, and it's a homebrew that happens with a lot of rule of cool DMs. Everything, which is whether it's Arcana or whatever that skill or knowledge would be in any given system. And it's kind of taken because I watched Kids on Brooms on Dimension 20, Misfits and Magic, and everything like that, where it's the Powered by the Apocalypse system. So you just sort of like say what you want to do, and then roll a dice about it, and everything.
Really quick though, before we jump to the ship, I'd want to drop in one more D&D specific nudge that I think can work regardless of what theme you're playing, and that is, I do kind of what the old intelligence skill used to do, where you get bonus proficiencies equal to your intelligence modifier.
Yeah, baby. That's a classic.
Intelligence is the most frequently dumped stat in the game. And by making it so that you get bonus proficiencies based on your skill, your intelligence modifier, it suddenly becomes way more appealing that you get to just pick things outside. Like I think you may want to like adjust that accordingly. But, a lot of times when you're choosing your character, you're choosing between a variety of different skills. Yeah. You may want to just mean that you can choose more of between those ones. You may want to just say you can choose any skill with those modifiers. That's up to a DM discretion. Yeah. But that's one that I think is a good nudge to make intelligence not quite so only useful for wizards and artificers.
Yeah, it lets intelligence. I mean, it can further compound the skill championship of bards and rogues. It can make fighters and barbarians and monks be a little bit more skill heavy, especially in the case of like a regular melee fighter or barbarian, where with both of those classes you can really just load up strength and con and like not have dex be terrible and be fine, and so you have a little room for some extra int, but yeah, I like that idea a lot. Because intelligence. I hope that the next version of Dungeons and Dragons changes some things around to not make intelligence sort of a universal dump stat unless you're a wizard or a artificer, because it genuinely, and maybe they'll do it through that because they used to do it through that. So that used to be an important part of it.
Anyway, that's all I wanted to get out before we jump
into a little bit more systemy. And me just like lifting this from another system, and this could be applied to anything. So you take whatever in that system is like the knowledge of magic, right? And maybe they have a definitive amount of spells, so this actually wouldn't work in Kids on Brooms because they don't really have that. But it works in systems that are a bit more strict, like Pathfinder or like D&D or like Burning Wheel or whatever, right? But if you have magic in the system and it has various deliberate actions, and a player comes to you and they're like, all right, my spell doesn't do this, but I would love it to do this. Well, baby, that's an Arcana check. That's all that is. You can just decide that like, as a DM, creating homebrew magical items or making rulings all the time, you're constantly in that space anyway. And especially as characters go further and further in, there is no reason that someone's like, all right, so I know that Cone of Cold is like this, but what I really want to do is make like an ice luge to slide down with Cone of Cold. So can I hard frost it? And it's like, roll a die about it. If you get a high enough number on that die, I'm gonna let it happen. If you don't know how to modify the core concept of the spell well enough. You can still cast the spell. I'm not burning a spell slot for you. We're rolling a die to see if your character instinctively knows how to modify the spell like this. And what that does, especially for things like warlocks, bards in early days, things like that, or in systems where magic is sparse, right? Where magic only has options, is it opens up options for players, because we've now seen systems where as long as everyone at your table is cool, you're not you're doing that as the system, and those work out fine because whatever the measure, this primarily works in dice systems, whatever the dice success and failure rates are, but whatever the measure is it's the success. I like working within the tools that I have, but like I like it when players are like, I want to do this, or combine. It's like, can I go alongside this person and they cast this and I cast this and they combine this way? Cool. Roll to see if you can figure out how to do that. DC's going to be cool, whatever it is, kind of thing. It's very rule of cool, but
you know, I'm a big fan of Matt Colville, Matthew Colville DM.
Oh yeah.
And I like Arcadia, which is his Patreon. And one of the things that he actually has, like, mechanics for people doing like joint actions together, that I highly recommend people check out. If you haven't, when you sign up for Matt Colville DM, you get literally the entire back catalog of releases. So you literally could just pop in there, pay $10, and get, I think they're like 18 issues now. It's a fantastic deal for really high quality content.
Oh yeah.
But one of the things that I know as a DM, I get concerned about when I hear rules like this is having creating a scenario in which players exploit a new mechanic, and so I just want to remind people that in previous older versions of D&D, there used to be 10th level spells, and that the way they handled getting rid of those is they literally had the god of magic be like, y'all fucked with this too much. I'm taking that away. You don't get 10th level spells anymore. And so I love this. And at the same time, I want to tell DMs out there that your god of magic can intervene and say, you fucked with this too much. I'm taking this.
Yeah, you could do it that way. You could also privately just let the person know, hey, I know I've let you do this several times. And not at the table. Probably let them do it. Let them exploit it. Yeah. But when you start noticing it, being like, hey, I know I let you do this several times, but I am not being able to figure out a way now to counter it, and that is making the play less fun for me. Can we pull back on it? And depending on your relationship with the player, you can make those choices and be like, we can quietly agree. But yeah, a lot of people are playing off Discord servers or Roll20 meetups and stuff like that, so they don't know each other. And then your method can be like this, and then you can just be honest about it as DM. It's like, listen, I let you do it, now you've exploited it. That's super cool that you figured that out. I'm not gonna let it happen again because I let it happen in the first place, so I can take it away.
A nice thing about having something with Mithras is that opens up a new plot element too, where they're suddenly now drawing the eye of the god of magic, and that's always a fun moment thematically. Now, Tim says in our chat, why not do that with Feats? And I'm not quite sure I understand what they're saying. Do you get what they're saying?
If they're saying it like, why not let people inform their own feats? You absolutely should. I'm a big, like, bring it to me, whatever it is, probably fine, kind of person. And so Brandon has taken some advantage of that, or brought in things from third-party materials that are super trusted sources that I've been like, okay, that's fine. I don't even need to see it if it's published by, freaking Cobalt Press. They know what they're about. I know what they're about. Press. And so any of that stuff is like sight unseen. I can just be like, oh, that's where it's from. Then you can do it. And then even for like custom items or like wanting to customize a feat or what have you, I think that it's doable. And if you can explain to me and narrate to me how a feat says one thing that you already already have, but you'd like it to apply in that thing, I can then, as a GM, make the judgment call of whether or not I agree with you, whether or not I think that that's a good idea, and whether or not that intrinsically changes the feat, and now the feat is that and not the other thing. It can't be used both ways. It kind of depends on the description, right? And everything. And you can kind of, in the moment, shot call that, but then again, on top of that shot calling, you can also be, if you don't like that intensity or you have too much anxiety around that, you can also simply be, we can talk about this offline for like next time, but I don't have time to think about it right now. Right?
Yeah.
And so that's the thing, is all of these homebrew nudges, systems and stuff like that, especially the nudges where it's not the DM just implementing a cool thing for their players to do, and it's a lot of like DM player back and forth, all of those kinds of things, you always have the rule that you are running the game. So you get to decide what goes into the game, and if you made a mistake in the past, like Brandon said, you can come up with a lore reason that mistake gets undone, and that's also fun. That's also fine. And if you have players that get real grumpy about it when you say, I feel like I gave you too much rope on this one, if you have players that get real grumpy about that, maybe talk to them. Maybe if they're still grumpy, maybe they just aren't your players anymore. It's okay.
Maybe when Mithras comes down to take it away from them, they're like, hey, you're not going to get that anymore, but I'm going to give you some other cool
trade
item
it, refine it, right?
As like a trade of being like, I appreciate your ingenuity, but this ain't going to happen anymore. But I'm going to give you. I'm going to. I
have a player right now that has a modify thing in the world ring that has one charge every week, and they ask me every time we play if it's charged yet, regardless of if it's been even close to a week. And it's the same thing. It's the Ring of Gramercy thing, but I just let it apply to literally anything, and so they can change one letter in a word that identifies an object or thing that they can see or interact with or know in the world, and they can change it. And DM discretion if I let them do it, right? Because I'm not going to let them break the game. But and they immediately used it to turn someone's combat armor into wombat armor, and I loved that, and it was very fun. And they might, knowing the player, they might try and gimmick it a little bit, but like at the end of the day, it didn't actually benefit them at all because the armor still worked. It was just now they were hovering wombats that orbited the person and bit at you, and the AC was a little bit lower, but they also had a grapple attack now. So like it was this is a fun flavor. So you can always kind of play with things, adjust things, and do things, and just kind of prepare yourself that maybe you're gonna step in and make a mistake and do something that's too nice. And honestly, if you're a GM and you can just roll with it, great. But if you're noticing the rest of the party's like, I feel like this person's a little more overpowered than the rest of us, and not in a using the raw system way, I feel like they got a little bit of a favor. You can always, again, talk with that person, do something with the lore, narrate it. You are the god of the world. So you get to choose. But yeah, let's talk. Is there a system or like mechanical method? Because you mentioned, of course, Wagon Chase, right? Curse of Strahd, right? You mentioned that as a kind of a good little mechanical system, Brandon. Is there another like mechanics thing that you like that's a little bit more than a nudge? It's a little bit more than just like gently nudging a rule, and more of like this doesn't exist in Pathfinder or D&D or whatever. I'm just making it. So, and I'm building a system for it.
This is still kind of a nudge. I want to add another one. For all DMs, I actually recommend you write a primer for your table.
Yeah.
Which you can hand out to players at your table, where they can read all the things. So sometimes there's things in the game that are handled where they're not necessarily clearly cut in the rules, and so you can, put together a document that shows, here's my homebrew rules, here's some of my restrictions on what I have for character options. Put together a document that new players can, when they get to your table, they know what their options are and what to expect from you as a DM.
This is also a great thing to write if you have a table and you're all going to start a game with each other in your session 0. You can also, like, on top of what you naturally are like, this is the world I'm building, this is what I need from it. When you do the session 0, like, checklists and stuff, you can add some of the, like, bigger points of that and be like, here's the primer. In this world, there is not this. We will not discuss it. Or in this world, this is happening. Because your players might have things that they're like, I really want this thing to exist in the world. I don't need all anthropomorphic races to exist, but I need to be a sheep person. I can either be the only sheep person, or there can be a race of sheep people. Can we put sheep people into this world? And
sheep people.
And me and my sheep. I love playing animal people. I'm almost a furry. Not quite, but I'm almost there.
Now with the new with the Ardlings, that's going to be a thing easy. You can just have a sheep head.
Yeah, right? You can be very there, but go on.
Okay, so I have a few other things in here. The first one I want to go over is how I redesign, and now D&D is actually codifying inspiration at the table, which I'm not sure how I feel about that. I think that's kind of an iffy one too.
I'll have to play it basically and to discover if it's good.
I have mixed feelings about it. I like making rules more consistent. I also think that inspiration was always meant to be kind of just like a DM being like, "Hey, I'm going to toss you giving a player a star," basically. But the way I handle inspiration is inspiration at my table is not rewarded for character moments. It is rewarded by players doing something to help the running of the table.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I primarily play my games in person. I'm not a big fan of digital play. So what that means is, if you come to my table and you bring snacks, that's inspiration. If you come to my table and you take notes, that's inspiration. If you come to my table and say, today I'm going to be the person who moves the miniatures around on the map, that's inspiration. Someone taking responsibility at the table for something that happens at the table, that gets inspiration. And your inspiration is only for that session only. So if you do something at that, and you basically you get a fresh, it creates that urgency to use your inspiration for one thing. So you always get inspiration at the beginning of your session if you're coming to the table, bringing something to the table. So if you bring a bag of chips, that's inspiration. If everyone's just like, I don't want to do this other stuff, but I want to bring a snack, fine. But I want people to be bringing stuff to the table, because if I bring, as a DM, a lot of work goes on behind the scenes, and having people bring other stuff to the table is really helpful.
Yep.
And then I replace inspiration as a mechanic of like giving out inspiration points with a system I call bonus points, which is just, rather than giving a person a usable advantage on a roll, instead they can store up a pool of what we call bonus points, and they can store up as many of them as they want.
Yeah.
And then what they can do is they can then spend those points to alter the outcome of their or other people's rolls.
Yep.
And they can use as many as they need to. So if you have like 20 or 30 points stacked up, you can alter your rolls by like 1 point for every point you spend. If you are wanting to alter the DM's rolls or another player's rolls, you can alter those by spending points at a 2-to-1 ratio.
Yep.
So, is that a thing in hero points in Pathfinder? I'm not familiar with it. I've just heard this somewhere before. Once again, not claiming ownership of these ideas or that these are original thoughts created by us. I'm almost certain I heard this from someone somewhere else, and that person, I wish I could give them credit, because I don't. But you acquire all this stuff in your head over years of play.
Yep.
You can't quite remember exactly where it came from. But that person out there, thank you. I don't take credit for this idea.
Yeah.
But I like it because of by making bonus points only a plus or +1 or -1 or whatever, you can give them out more easily.
Yeah.
You don't have to you don't just have to wait till a big moment happens. And one of the things that you can do is you can give them out to people whenever someone fails a roll. I think that's a great option. It's like
someone's having a super rough day. Throw them some points, right?
Every time they fail, every time someone fails a skill check or misses an attack or someone.
What system do they do that in?
There's
adversity tokens happen in Mismag, or they happen in Apocalypse. I can't remember. There's adversity tokens that's sort of like that.
I know, and I can't remember. I think it might be powered by the Apocalypse. You get experience whenever you have a failure.
Yeah, that's what it is. So I think there's a version of powered by the Apocalypse game where they replaced experience with adversity tokens, where every time you fail, you just automatically get adversity tokens, and then you can then spend those on each other's things and everything, so that you can definitely have a win, which works really well in like 1 and 2 shots where you're not going to have a long campaign, so failing for the whole session really sucks, because you it's not like a long campaign where it's like, yep, the dice just weren't with me this session, fortunately I have 100 more ahead of me, right? Like if you're playing like a 6-hour Sunday game and that's the only time you're gonna play that character in that game, man, do you want to be able to flip your luck if the dice just aren't with you. And sometimes that's how it feels. Sometimes it feels like the dice just don't want to give it to you that day. But yeah, I love that. Love that system. I like that system both for the modification of inspiration, and I love it for the you did a good thing or you failed, or basically it's like I can hand out points frequently for like to make the gameplay experience better, or because other people were making the gameplay experience better, even if it's for something as simple as that was a hilarious joke, we all laughed, here's a bonus here's a bonus point.
And the nice thing about bonus points, and this is something for you to figure out at your table. You may want to put a cap on how many people can have, how many points someone can save up. This is all stuff that's just meant to be experimented with and tried at your table, and if you don't like it, you don't have to use it.
Yep.
Like that's the whole point. But I want to talk about homebrew and home rules to achieve a specific theme or to help set tone. And one of the first ones that I like to do is I like darkness to matter. I like darkness to be scary. I like it to be meaningful. And what that means, my big change is that there is no racial dark vision in my games.
Yep. And I fully understand it, because especially in 5e, more species have dark vision than don't. House cats don't have dark vision, not tabaxi, but house cats, and that's weird. But yeah, ditching dark vision is, I think it's in the amount of times that like the argument for, but I want my character to have dark vision. Okay, but why? To make it less exciting.
Dark vision. Yeah, I think the whole point, the whole problem with dark vision, you're right, is it just kind of just means like, it ends up that you with most games I've played, DMs are just like, if like 2/3 of the party has dark vision, we're just going to ignore darkness, because it becomes too nuts and bolts to figure out who can see in the dark and who can't.
Then you stop caring about the party members that don't have dark vision. You're just like, whatever, you have dark vision for some reason. Everyone can see this.
And instead, and of course, people often just be like, I don't want to track dim light versus dark light versus bright light.
Irritating.
And so the solution to that is either to double down or to get rid of it entirely.
Yep.
And to either double down and be like, no, darkness matters for everyone, or I'm just not going to have dark spaces in my game. And I like eliminating dark vision I only eliminate it as a racial bonus. I do not eliminate it if you get it from a class feature or a spell or a magical item.
Yeah.
Those still function.
Well, because those either cost resources, you had to obtain the magical item, or they were a path that you took. Like, they matter for your character's story.
So, I like that rule because I also feel like in most 5th edition play, resource tracking has gone away.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of, that's one thing that I kind of wish was brought back a bit more.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like people don't know the terror of being, deep into a dungeon and realizing you don't know if you have enough torches to light the way out.
Mm-hmm.
And then realizing that you're going to have to navigate this dungeon in complete darkness while monsters swarm around you. And how freaking dangerous that can be. And that would be, a bit of the reality of going into a deep, dark place of the earth.
Yeah. Where no light reaches. It is funny how much dark pages. Let me think about homebrew that I like that's about mood or tone that isn't. So there's one thing that I'm using currently in Through the Mill, which is sort of taken from various systems do this, and essentially, and I modified it to work within D&D, but it's essentially it's so you're currently doing it, which is you wake up in the morning, you roll 2d6, you have that many. I'm going to call them mental fortitude points. It's real hard for me to get off the ableism of like sanity and insane and stuff like that.
Yeah.
It's so baked into the dialect, but mental fortitude. So when bad things happen, horrifying things, because they're in a bad area with horrifying things, and it's not the same as any of the other world that they've traveled in to this point. I implemented this system to be like, all right, so you're going to roll this. You don't have to tell me what the number is. And then there's going to be these checks throughout the day or based off events or choices and stuff. And based off of those things, whether it's me narrating it and like just making it happen, or it's character choice or failures or what have you, some of those mental fortitude points are going to go away. And if you hit 0, we're gonna have like a thing happen, right? A significant.
I like Tim's comment here. Just call it spoon points, or you can just
Spoon
call them
points.
spoons.
Spoons.
You can just call
Okay.
them spoons.
Spoons is a great term.
You get 2d6 spoons per day.
2d6 spoons, and when you run out of spoons, and like depending on like what caused that, I have a lot of room as a GM to implement what I have, and I actually have a little sheet of things that happen when you're hit 0 and when you go negative, and it's not nearly as kind as the exhaustion table, which is not a kind table after you get past 2. But I'm
playing in this game.
You are playing in that game, and so like all through this system, I'm going to be doing that all through this section, and then it won't be again because they probably won't be in something that is that there. So I temporarily was like this, and it was because of it was because there's a great book that I'm just cribbing a bunch from and using it to inspire me for this area, and it's all darkness, and I've just sort of waved away dark vision with it's a darkness that not even dark vision can easily see
dark
through.
Vision has to work like night vision.
Yeah,
there has to be ambient light.
There has to be anything in the world for there to be light. There's just no light hitting this unless you create it. They're very powerful. That's not a problem. But like in that situation, I'm like, you have to think about keeping the lights on, because if you let the lights go out, it's bad. But yeah, I love doing that. I like the idea of spoons points that I'll grab from Tim here, of spoons points in general. I think you can generally do something like that where you have sort of a mental disposition or like a mood meter that you could literally throw into almost any system within utilizing the mechanics and the tools of said system, and be like, you have this much rope each day, and when you hit the end of it, mechanically we're going to do that, but I as the DM is going to like narrate how we get you there through plot, through struggles, through unlucky rolls, right, through seeing comrades be put into danger, right, the things that would give us trauma in real life that so often is just brushed aside. And so it's like a mechanical way of making that hit home, a little bit more so that you can bring it into your games, because a lot of people struggle with that.
You're taking some inspiration from one of my favorite books that I think I sent your way, and that is a book from Lamentations of the Flame Princess system.
Yep.
And that's called Veins of the Earth.
Veins of the Earth. So good.
Scrap Princess.
So good. If you want some dark cave diving horror, it's in there, and it is every time I look at it, I find something, because like I don't read books linearly. I jump to sections that I'm interested in, and so every time I go through it, I'm either reminded of or find something new where I'm just like, I'm gonna take this and I'm gonna tweak it a little bit, just ever so gently, to make it work in 5e, and then it's going in. It's fully going into the game, or I'm going to build it into my lore, and it's going in, and it's not for. I mean, Lamentations is a pretty easily adjustable system to like a D20 because it still uses dice, but it's not perfectly aligned up for 5e. It's not doing the same sort of mechanical considerations. It's agnostic enough.
I have a book that I haven't gotten a chance to use, but I feel like it does for dark, spooky forests what Veins of the Earth does for the Underdark.
Yeah.
And it's a book that I recently picked up called Into the Weird and Wild, where weird is spelled W-Y-R-D.
Yep.
It was a Kickstarter I backed recently, and I feel like it takes a lot of like systems that maybe there's rules for in D&D, maybe there isn't, but it takes them and it actually kind of simplifies them. And rather than, for example, a lot of times people waive tracking food and water because of it's too crunchy. It's too messy. And so what they do in their system is that you have basically supplies that you've purchased. They're just a unit of resource called supplies. And then they have a mechanic in which everyone every day rolls effectively what would be a survival check. They don't necessarily use a D20 for it, but you can use a D20 check, and they set a certain DC base. The way you could do this with D&D would be you set a certain difficulty based on the harshness of the environment they're in, and then everyone rolls a survival check, and everyone who passes is able to source their own food and water without going through a resource, and then everyone who fails has to either take a point of exhaustion or consume a supply box, like a supply crate, to make it through that day. And because you're out, and the way they make this work mechanically, also because of technically you lose a point of exhaustion on a long rest. So why would you? Oh, you're just gonna eat your supply and then rest, and they say you only recover from exhaustion while sleeping in a building that's heated and with a roof over your head.
Yeah. So you can't just camp it out. Tent is not building. Tent is blanket hovering over you at a distance.
And so I like that because it makes those resources make sense. It simplifies them. And creates like just a daily mechanic of, hey everyone, it's time to do your supply check to see if you have to go through a resource or not.
Yep.
And like, you may be in like a pastoral region where water and food are plenty. So like the DC for your survival check is like 10.
Oh yeah.
And then suddenly, and most people are going to pass that. And so the rate at which you go through your resources is pretty slow. Then you may be in a desert, and the DC for that survival check is suddenly 25.
And you're like, woof.
And you're like, okay, now I'm put in a position where, do I want to take a point of exhaustion every once in a while so that we can spread out these resources? Or how do I want to approach this? It also has a variant rule for exhaustion, where rather when you take a point of exhaustion, you roll on a table to see what you would get afflicted with rather than D&D's rules for exhaustion.
You want to talk about survivability threats? Oh, I was just thinking about another high rollers one that they used early on that really amped up the beginning of their damn campaign.
Yeah.
If you drop, not die, just drop, get dropped to 0 hit points, roll a Constitution saving throw, I want to say it was, and then roll on an injury table. And if you fail the Constitution, just roll an injury. And those injuries can be anything from like a gash that needs to be bandaged up, like cleaned and bandaged up so it doesn't get affected, but not a big deal. Not a terrible deal, to you lost an eye, bro. And in a high magic game, in a game where people can regenerate limbs and stuff, this really makes that stuff matter more, and it affects play for a while. Again, that's some session 0 shit that you need to talk about and make clear, or the primer guide, like this is how we roll, because that's a lot more hardy damage and punishing. But that's what's great about that stuff to set tone, is when you're lower level and so it's harder to survive and you get knocked down more and everything like that. Oh man, does that injury table, you really appreciate that con save passing. And that injury table is a dangerous game where it's like, all right, this person's lost a leg. That's going to affect their mobility until we can get them to like a town with like a healer that can do something about that, or something. Or one person, the injury, they rolled a nat 1 on the injury table, so the injury that knocked them down also pierced their lung, so you couldn't just revivify them because they were suffocating at the same time, and everything. So you had to deal with that. It's wild. It's a wild way to do it, but it means that your players immediately are in much more danger, which matters which makes a thing doing that. But again, that, much like survivability units, right, are things that you absolutely should be bringing up, like, hey, I'm looking to do this, or this is a key portion of my game. I need you to know about it so that you can consent to it, or we need to discuss if this is something we want vibe-wise, because it changes the whole tone of a game. Right. Which is key.
That's part of the reason why, to me, I feel like the sweet spot of D&D, at least, is like levels 3 through 8. Because during that time period is when players have enough abilities and spells and options going around where they have a bunch of cool things they can do. But they don't, like, they're not getting into the point where they're having like 5th level and above spells, where they can negate serious problems completely. And that's one of the things, like, that's why, to me, I think, like, I love that level of play more than any other period, like tone of play in D&D. Because at some point you get to the point where, like, oh, you know, right now I'm playing a 15th level cleric. If you were to hack one of our limbs off, I can prep a regeneration spell.
Yeah, it's fine. It's fine.
I can solve those problems. If I was level 10 or level 8, if I was level 8, that'd be a very big problem that I would not have a way of solving.
Yeah.
And I think that's something to be said, is like, as the game goes on, it gets harder to make the stakes for your characters more severe.
I think that's why so many long campaigns. Go on. Sorry.
I see that. Go ahead. You had a thought.
I think that's why so many long campaigns. Are like baked as a combination of like mystery and moral choice problem solving, because especially in like Pathfinder, D&D, any of the like D20 type systems, or the like superpower growth systems that are built to carry characters for a long period of time over many sessions, right? they continue to increase in power over that time, and they get very, very powerful, and you can throw more and more combat at them and everything like that, but they're likely going to survive most things they're going to survive. And even if combat is dangerous, they're still not worried because they have a lot of, again, magic and abilities or connections by this time to solve problems that they don't want to have to permanently accept, right, and everything. And so that's when DMs tend to get more like, all right, but now what's your moral choices? You are now demigods. How does that influence the world? Because they've lost the ability to make a lot of like weight happen in the day-to-day conflict, and it becomes more like you're choosing something that matters. And I think that's where a lot of DMs go, but I don't think that that's fully necessary if early on you begin to implement homebrews to benefit your long term. If you know your hope is to go to like level 20 in D&D or whatever, if you know your hope, you can build in long terms. Yeah,
I'm going to throw out a hot take. I think most games that I've played in progressed character levels too quickly.
Usually, yes. Yeah, usually, yeah.
And while I get it, because of like getting a level up as a reward is like one of the most consistent rewards that players get for playing. Even in our game, I mean, like I've had a blast playing our game, and sometimes I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, I can't believe we're already this high of a level. Like I've heard of people playing game like there's a guy on YouTube, I can't remember his name, he's a regular D&D creator who has been playing the same campaign for like a decade, and his characters are like level 12.
Yeah.
And I think that DMs might, if anything, I would say to characters regarding like progression is, you can slow down. You can slow down, let your characters spend some time at a level, because of there's been games I've played in where I'll get a new ability, and before a scenario will ever come up in which I could use that ability, I'll get leveled up, get a new ability again.
Yep.
And I think that I also think that by slowing the game down and letting people sit at lower levels, you also put people in a position where they're not going to have a spell to solve every problem that comes at them, and they're going to have to think a bit outside of the box, and that's one of the things I like about old school D&D is like old school D&D combat was something to be avoided entirely. If you got into combat, you usually did so because you fucked up, and most of the times when you had a monster that you needed to, that was like when you had a monster that was an obstacle, the solution was to either come up with a trap to kill the monster or another method of getting the monster out of your way, because the monster would not be otherwise killable by regular people.
Yeah, it's weird. Yeah, I agree. I appreciate the call out, Tim, on they're level, I think y'all are level 14, 15, something like that.
Yeah, we're in the 13 to 15 range.
Yeah, 13 to 15 range, somewhere in that range, and you're all at like pantheon interactions, like god pantheon interactions and everything. Mm-hmm. I think it's a real difference. Like there's a lot that's changed, and we'll do this in another talk about the different ways you can approach the narration of the story and the pace of the story. With through the mill, I specifically was like, I think I started y'all at level 2 because level 1 is garbage. It's very hard to keep people alive at level 1. And so I started you all at level 2, and everything like that. But I'm like, let's see if we can do a level to 20 campaign. And it's been over 2 years, and it's probably been 80 sessions or so, like 2-ish hour sessions, and like that's a lot of time. But you're not wrong in the way that based off of that, it means that you've essentially spent 8 to 10 hours in game at a given level. rather than, which in old school at table D&D, 8 to 10 hours is like maybe 2 sessions because of how, people used to gather like in a house and play for like 4 or 5 hours at a time and stuff like that. And it's like, that's not really a lot of time, but because of the nature of if you play every other week or you play over time, you only play like 2-3 hours at a time, 8 to 10 hours might be like 4 sessions over the period of like 3-4 months. So in real time, it feels long. Long, but in reality for your characters, it's like, all we did between level 10 and level 11 was this one night. Like we had this one night. We may only have 1 or 2 encounters. Yeah, and everything
in between levels.
But it feels more. And I think that's a milestone leveling thing, and it's something that I prefer milestone. But it's something that I myself as a DM will in the future like take a little bit more of a look at and be like what has actually happened time wise. And I'm not taking this so much as a criticism as much as it's not something I really have thought about in this mind frame of like what has happened for the, not big events that we've played, but what's actually happened for the characters over the period in between levels, so that I can be like there, because my other stuff that I'm running right now is a little bit more clearly spaced out. You go to a new area, you spend a few days there, you fight a champion battle, you gain a level. Right, it's very video game level.
You have like more concise arcs.
Yeah, where it's like you go to this zone, you do all the things in this zone, and then Waterdeep obviously has it built into it, and everything like that. So like I'm just going off of that roughly, but definitely an interesting thing to consider, and something we should talk about when we're talking about, maybe we'll do a session on like campaign pacing and doing like how to stretch a campaign. That being,
I think one of the things, I think that's just I think it's a great subject about like how you can frame a campaign within a certain level range, and you don't have to have a campaign that goes all the way to level 20. In fact,
arguably you shouldn't. You shouldn't
boundary on your campaign. Yeah, level 20 is a type of play that is chaotic, messy, and
nigh
almost
impossible
as a DM to build.
If you want a great example of high level encounters, and I've mentioned them a couple of times before, if you watch High Rollers, and you can jump in at anything past episode 100 on their current campaign, that DM is a hero at I'm on it's kind of spoilers, but I'm not being specific. I'm on episode 143 right now. They're at episode like 160. I'm on episode 143. Their characters are like level 16, level 17. They fight inside of the magma in a volcano. So the magma's constantly doing damage to them. They've got enemies, the like lava enemies that they're fighting. They've got a bubble that like minimizes the magma, but the enemies that they're fighting have abilities that like knock them around so that they get knocked out of the bubble. And then when they start the moment they hit the magma, they take damage. And if they start their next turn, they take damage, because they like their weakest character has 120 hit points. Their strongest character has over 200 hit points, barbarian of course, and as far as like durability wise, and like they've got fire, they've got tons of money, so of course they're doing fire resistance potions, but like they're taking 5, 10, 15 damage when they do well every turn without a thought and no ability to get away from it, plus they're getting dragged back out of it and taking like 60, 10 damage here and there. And so it's not really the enemies they're fighting. They're going to kill those enemies. It's the trying to keep everyone in the protective bubble space, and they're just trying to survive a certain number of rounds so they can get to the bottom of the volcano. And then they've got to figure out a way to get out of the volcano. And it's like, it's such a good like timing and goals and environmental damage, and being like trusting that it's like, these are super powerful characters. They will figure out how to not die. I will just throw it at them. This should kill them, and they'll figure out how to not die at it. They have all their abilities. They're gonna do it.
that's a session we could do a whole thing about, is just encounter design.
It's so good. But so I want to talk, so leading into the last little bit of homebrew, and then I kind of want to talk to you about some homebrew in the context of how it might make you be like, these are rules that I don't like and would make me leave a table, or things that would make me get up out of a table. Because I know I do want to talk a little bit about this. So number one, the number one in my mind homebrewed thing that happens oftentimes for me in D&D, because I like dice rolling and everything like that, and I don't require this at my and that would be fine.
I think our stream might have dropped.
It's fine. It's back up now.
Okay.
It dropped for just a little bit, just a little brief moment. If any player goes off and does the nasty with somebody, I'm gonna invent a mechanic at that moment if they want to dice about it. If they don't want to dice about it, fade to black, I'm fine. We don't even need to actually describe exactly what happens, but it can be very fun. And there are older supplements that actually have full rule sets for all these things, and I'm sure there's online materials too.
Of course,
but like in my mind, I'm just like, man, depending on what they're sleeping, it's like, someone wants to hook up with this like dangerous giant, like this Goliath person that they're hooking up with, and they're very beefy and very dangerous and everything. First con save, and then based off that, let's do like a performance check, and then like a check. Like have some fun with it and everything like that. But I know some people that absolutely have no interest in anything other than other players fading to black. They don't want to play with it. They don't like jokes about it in their game. They don't like anything like that. I know a couple people like that and everything.
I mean, I'll be honest with you. I am definitely of the more kind of preferring that characters fade to black. It's okay to make a few jokes, but I'm generally personally not at a game table for the erotic fantasy, and so that kind of stuff like doesn't really do a whole lot for me as far as being a player at a table.
Yeah, of course.
And everyone obviously has different reasons for playing, and I'm not going to yuck someone's yum. It's just generally not something that I'm at a table for. But so I can see that like that's definitely a really important session 0 conversation.
Oh yeah. That's like session 0 conversation checklist. Gimme is romance, flirting, physical intimacy, and then fade to black, avoid it entirely. Some characters pursue it. Are you okay with other people pursuing it? You really gotta nail down that stuff in a session 0. Otherwise there's gonna be a player that's uncomfortable.
Yeah, and part of it for me is that I'm already awkward enough with romance in real life. I'm only gonna be more awkward about it when we're trying to role play it. So it's just not my bag.
Not your cup of meat. Tim, give me a shaft handler check is literally a line I have heard at a table. Wow. Like I'm not here to yuck groups young. If you are very like a real like erotic game, fine. I'm 100% fine with it. I'm much more of the type, I don't really care. I don't even think about it in my campaigns. I'm not good at flirting as a human being, and I'm terrible at it as a DM. So every NPC that hooks up with people is like openly direct and very like hey, like, you down? No? All right, move on. Very, very Joey from Friends. How you doing? Obvious. And then rejection. All right, I'll spin off and do that. And that's kind of my disposition for NPCs. It's like, if a player shows interest in them, they're probably down. If they're not showing interest in them, then they're just going to back off. And I don't play a lot of characters that are particularly important that have this feature, an NPC thing, although my characters will casually joke about adult relations a lot, but they won't actually execute on it a lot.
This makes me think that this shaft handler check makes me think
that'd get me to walk out of the table real quick.
That would get me to walk out of the table real quick.
Oh, I hate that.
But it does actually bring up an important thing.
If it was serious. Go on.
No. I'm going to spin this off in a slightly different direction than you might think.
Yeah.
I guess you would call that a sleight of hand check, right?
Yeah. You can joke about it. That's definitely true. But anyway.
But what I would say is that, being a player at a table is running into DMs who are so rigid with the rules that they don't allow you to try and do things that aren't explicitly defined by them.
Yep.
And this is definitely something that I don't run into as much anymore because of the culture around D&D has changed.
Yeah.
It was something that you would run into in older games. And it would absolutely be a buzzkill where you're like, I want to try this cool thing. And they're just like, no, that doesn't work that way. And this kind of touches back to what you were saying about like letting people try an Arcana check to modify their spell. Is that having a DM who, like, the whole point of TTRPGs is that they have rules, but they also are like way more flexible.
Yeah, I'm not playing like a video game. Yeah, exactly.
Right? And so the whole point is that you can stretch them and test them and break the rules in ways that make sense at a table. And so, like, probably one of the biggest problems you can have at a table is a DM that says no too much.
DM that says no too much. DM that doesn't even give you a chance or a swing at it. Again, that's...
It's okay, and I don't want to say that it's not okay to say no as a DM. DMs should feel empowered to say no. But I encourage them to say no, but...
Yep.
Just like how we're, like, in improv, you're supposed to say yes and... You can also say no, but you can let me give you an alternative, something that makes So if you're going to deny characters something that they're trying to attempt, that is like, not completely outside the realm of possibility.
Yeah.
Try and come up with a compromise.
I'm gonna give you a classic situation. This is again me taking off NADPOD off one of their Patreon streams that's just users writing in stories, patrons writing in stories. There was a grandmother, a woman of 85 years old, who was playing D&D with her family. And this is the DM who was their grandchild, and they were asking this because the grandmother chose to play a monk because she wanted to be like a dope monk, right? Like, she just wanted to have a monk aesthetic. But what she really wanted to do was shoot lasers out of her hands. Monks don't do that, right? Nothing really does that, but monks definitely don't do that. A warlock, and they mentioned in their thing, I talked to her about a warlock because they have Eldritch Blast, and you could easily flavor Eldritch Blast to be like hand photons and everything. And they're like, no, I want to be a monk, but I want this. And like, age barrier, right? Fiction, whatever, doesn't matter. And they asked, and they're like, well, as long as the range thing is like normal range stuff, and they're mostly just being a ranged attacker, like, yeah, they get benefits for being a monk with movement mechanically, but if they're already having this problem, they're probably not min-maxing their character. Just let them shoot lasers out of their hands and give it an appropriate damage die and require, if they want to shoot like power beams out of their hand, what's it going to hurt if you mechanically make it make sense so that everything about it doesn't make them overpowered, but they get to just flavor it, right?
You can just take what is the Way of the Four Elements monk and make that.
Yeah, and do that. Yeah, and like, yeah, just figure it out for the person, because it's not that they were asking, I want to be able to punch someone a whole bunch of times, then shoot lasers. And no, they just wanted to be like, I want to shoot lasers. It's like, okay, do you want to stay at a distance? Well, sometimes I want to go up to them and shoot a laser right in their face. And it's like, if the damage is right, like, it doesn't really matter how it's flavored, as long as like the features don't make it overpowered. And so, like, this is a great example of, it's like, I don't expect all DMs to just off the dome be able to in a moment to like make those fly adjustments. I certainly can. I just trust that I'll put up with my own mistakes later. But the other side of it is that if you are too strict to rules as written, if you're too hewn to that, you are making the play less fun for people unless you are specifically playing a game that is supposed to be hard and limiting. And there are games for that. But, like, I don't want to play the Dark Souls of tabletop games. I want to play the fucking X-Men of tabletop games, and that's why I'm playing D&D.
I'm so baffled that they are coming out with a Dark Souls 5th edition.
I understand why it happens. The player base is there for it, and people get more by making it 5e sells more copies. But man, is 5e not built for Dark Souls. It is not. It should have been Merkburg. It's right there. It's hugely popular. But what's another thing? What's another like homebrew or like choice at a table that will just be like that will get you to just be like, if you're not willing to budge on this, I can't play at this table.
I think the kind of things we're talked about generally just cover the play issues of like mechanics at the table, of if the DM is too inflexible, I think is probably the number one. Or the rest of them are kind of boiled down to more social interaction issues, and I think that's probably where the vast majority of issues of things that have caused me to want to step away from a table have come from. And sometimes those things can impact how rules work. Like, I personally have never had the misfortune of being at a table where a DM plays blatant favoritism. I've never had that issue. I've never seen it happen where like a DM comes in, like a player comes to the table and player gets like a bunch of really broken, overpowered stuff, and other people get screwed. Just not had that, but I have heard of people having that issue, and I think that would cause me to be, want to move away from a table. But I will talk about one instance that I personally experienced that was really frustrating, and it had to do with a player metagaming. And I think metagaming is metagaming can manifest in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. So it's important. Metagaming gets thrown around a lot.
Yeah.
As an issue, and I think it's important to start to talk in specific terms.
Yeah.
So in one game that I was playing, I was playing a Star Wars RPG, and my character was an agent of Vader, but he was a spy. And at some point, that was discussed openly at the table, out of character. Mm-hmm. And immediately, one of the players at the table his character is suddenly suspicious of me and following and trying to uncover my character's past. At every moment, despite my character having never done anything suspicious. In fact, it wasn't even his job to sabotage the players. Yeah. He was just an agent for Vader, supply information, and the goals of the players weren't even necessarily running against Vader's goals. Like, Vader didn't want to stop them. He didn't even really give a damn what they were doing. I was just one of many in a massive network of spies. But this player suddenly became immediately suspicious of me and started going out of his way to have his character be paranoid and do things to try and catch my character in the act. And ultimately he did, and our characters fought to death, and we both died.
That'd get me to walk a table. That'd get me to walk a table right then. Like, walk out from a table.
If I was playing at that table, I would have been like, why are you suspicious of him?
Yeah. Just call it out. You
know.
definitely call it out right there and be like, you haven't been suspicious of him until you as a player learned. I'll come back. There it is. Yeah, the DM did not call that out. I'm sure it made you sour on that group as a whole. Right?
Yeah, that game didn't last long after that.
For me, I'm going to give you some...
And one of the things that was really unfortunate about that is that DM was really excellent at improvisation and all sorts of other things. He was really fun DM to play for. But that one moment really soured the game for me. And I'm pretty sure that the game ended for me after that.
I'm going to give you some would have graduated into homebrew rules if you're playing 5th ed that weren't homebrew rules, but rules written that would get me to leave a table that I wouldn't have left a table for a decade ago. If somebody introduces I will say natural born, or rather true collective civilization of sentient creatures, and they are evil universally because of what they were born as, I'm gone. I'm out of that table. And there's a reason for it, and it's not just my leftist progressive social justice-y self, although that does inform it.
And that's valid too.
That's totally valid, and that's enough. It's that I realized that the weakness of the world building in that case is so apparent, and I understand that is rules as written, playing to the text of endless role-playing games, and so I will not fault anyone for having done that. I've done it in the past. We all kind of go through that. I'm not going to judge it, but if I then talk to that thing and I'm like, are there any categories of society that this has happened? Is it that the political power structure is this way, like the dominant force in society is this way, but the people in general would be fine if not under the yoke of the... Like, I try to get in there and figure out if it's like, are you just describing this poorly, or are they being perceived by the rest of the world as this and everything? You don't got to give me plot hooks, but is there something more to this? And if the answer is nope, they are just born evil, they are an evil thing, but they have a civilization, because that's the big key. They operate as a community. I'm like, no, I'm out. That is impossible writing. Now, if it's a bunch of...
It's okay.
Go on.
It's okay to have an evil nation.
Yeah,
it's okay
because the state can be evil, even, exactly. And they can convince their people to do it.
Organization, exactly, but to say that is inherent about
a birth of a thing,
about the birth of something.
That's what monsters are for. That's what elementals are for. That's what everything else is for.
The one thing that I have a slight inclination, very slight, against that is tieflings. I do think, I personally think that if you have demonic blood in you, that should be something that doesn't have zero consequence other than I get to have corns and hooves.
I think it's fine to discuss the idea that you are lineaged from like an evil history, right? I think that's fine to be like, you definitely have this blood in you, and it's something. But then if you have, which is pretty rare in most campaigns, because usually tieflings are like rare or one-off type creatures.
And tieflings are also not... I also hate the word race in terms of D&D because
heritage is what I try to use.
Tieflings are heritage, ancestry, and even then, like, tieflings are like not even those things. They're like a crossbreeding of humanoids with demons or devils.
Yeah, and so
are not humanoids.
So like I think it's an interesting thing to talk about, like the history and how that informs them. I had a campaign where I had a tiefling, and the tiefling went to this was just around when I was really starting to hammer back against this whole like bioessential evil, and I had a tiefling, and the tieflings were inherited from demonic or devilish species and everything like that, but they themselves were not a aggregated people. They were just scattered about and everything. Yes. And they were all different kinds of characters and NPCs.
And tieflings and the thing about tieflings is they can manifest in anywhere.
Yeah,
anywhere can have a tiefling. The tieflings are not like are not a coherent group.
But in this case, what I decided to do is, because there was like deep lore in this world, is that in a city that was getting over its racial bias, right? Or in a kind of a Jim Crow era of racial bias in there, they had put a large community of humans, orcs, and bugbears, and what were Dwergar, but I reflavored them into a section of the city because they were from this region and everyone from that kingdom was bad, and everything like that. And the orcs historically were unnatural in my world. They were created, very Tolkien-esque created thing, and they actually loved the tieflings because the tieflings were the first group of people to unshackle them and not then imprison them from their creators, because the tieflings were seen as such bad people that they had empathy for this. So they were like, oh, you're just put upon, we get that, and we have more power because of our origins, so we're gonna do this thing, and not to then become in charge of you, but because we will then weaken the people that are attacking us. And it became a whole conversation around, it's like, were they ever, even though they were from this and have this kind of heritage, was it ever that this group of people were actually malicious, or was it that they could have been and then you treated them poorly and then they became malicious? Because that's what happens when you treat people poorly all their life. And absolutely. It became that whole thing. And I think you can do that kind of stuff. You can have those discussions without being like drow, or I know that people who are deep in the D&D lore, it's like there's always been 2 or 3 societal exceptions and Drizzt in the drow, and it's like, yeah, but no one focused on that, and neither did Wizards of the Coast, other than Drizzt. He was always the exception. I think you can go in there.
For me, it's just like a lore issue.
Yeah.
Because to me, like, if you're talking about D&D specifically, lore,
D&D lore.
And there's a lot of problematic D&D lore, and I'm not trying to be in defense of
that,
of things like orcs
or Hadozi
or goblins or any other number one that is tradition, that is also like has obvious clear connections to real life racial groups.
But yeah, tieflings are very high fantasy in their nature.
Tieflings are very high fantasy, and I feel like they're like, if anything, I would be like, if you want to play a person with horns and hooves and stuff, I'll make like a different race for you.
Yeah. If you want to do that,
if you want to play someone with demonic blood, I'm going to have demons be a part of my world. Demonic blood is going to be a real problem that your character is going to have to face. Yeah, I want you to lean into this arc. I want you to be a good character. I just want you to lean into this conflict because you're giving it to yourself. That's how I feel about tieflings.
But I think that's the great thing though about them, in the same way that like vampires are bad, right? Vampires are universally bad. They're always bad, and the reason that they're bad is because they must predate on other sentient creatures and they lose their humanity, right? Mm-hmm. They're also a comparison to a number of other things, but like vampires are bad, and so you can have things that are bad, and you can then play a character that gets vampirism and fights with the vampirism and struggles against it, and then maybe gets it cured or what have you, and everything like that. Or you can do a whole like vampires are just a different species, and they can survive on non-human blood, but now it's not like the vampire original thing, and you've lost a bit of flavor of that internal struggle and conflict that was done. And I think tieflings were very much in that same vein, where it's like they were supposed to be this thing, and then they became this other thing. They were supposed to be a conversation about internal conflict, or just an evil character, right? Just a bad person. You could also, because that can happen at a table. that's another thing that'll get me hard investigating and probably walking away from a table. I've not seen a lot of villain campaigns, tables that are like, we run bad people, that are handled very well. And so it's not that it can't be. It's that I am suspicious immediately of a table where it's like, we're playing the bad guys, and it's like, oh, but like the anti-hero, but actually good guys class, like prejudice. No, bad guys. And I'm like, I'm not saying that this can't possibly be good. I'm just saying that when you're inhabiting characters and doing villainous shit, there's a lot of things I don't even let happen in my campaigns that I feel like are going to probably come up. It's sort of it's not like it's like this isn't 100% chance, but there's a lot of nines in that percentile for me to assume that this table's gonna go to places that I'm like, nope, now, I'm out.
To kind of go in that direction, a red flag for a table is, let's say something that comes up at the table that I am okay with, but another player at the table is not okay with, and the DM allows it anyway. That is a red flag.
That's a red flag at the table. That is a red flag at the table.
Because I don't have to understand the other person's objections to a certain thing happening at the table to care. I don't need to understand necessarily their reasonings for it. The fact that they feel uncomfortable is the issue.
Yeah, that's it. That's all. There is no other game where you would be forced to do that in that way. Like, we would not be playing a game of Risk and then some peer of mine that was just watching us play Risk, when you decided to personally target me amongst the other 3 players of Risk, and you're playing, and that's a PvP game even, and you're targeting me, there'd be no peer of mine that would be like, hey, by the way, I'm in charge of this, and we're gonna let this happen, and you need to shut up. That would never happen in any other game, but it happens in D&D all the time due to the nature of how D&D is played. And
so I'll actually give an example of I was running a game recently with Camille, Celine, my brother, and my brother's girlfriend. We did a little 2-shot.
Yeah.
You were out for a bit.
Yeah.
And I ran the first session during one of our games, and then I ran another one outside of it last Friday.
Yeah.
And there was a moment in the game where someone was picking up. A bunch of potions had been handed out at a festival, and they had caused all sorts of horrible mutations. And one of them, and part of it is meant to be kind of tongue-in-cheek and fun. This was from a pre-made one-shot that I found. So while I'm responsible for the things at my table, these were not necessarily my original ideas.
Yeah.
But one of the, and I rolled a random encounter based off of a sheet of possible encounters.
Yeah.
And one of them was like a woman who had taken like a potion that had made her skin turn all like crazy wrinkly but hard, and also made her grow like claws. But the other one was a toddler who then every time it opened its mouth belched out a giant fireball.
Yeah.
And at one point, and so in this particular scene, I described them as being mother and child.
Oh yeah.
And I specifically told the players, like, this is not an encounter where I want you to kill these people. I don't want you to do that. These people are victims of circumstance.
Yeah.
So, like, I'm really not going to have you guys injuring a child at my table. I don't want you to do that. This encounter can be solved through other means.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the child is just sitting there, just accidentally belching out fireballs at people, getting people hurt. While the mom is pissed and actively trying to get the guy responsible for handling out the potions, but he didn't realize that his potions had been sabotaged to cause this mess.
Mm-hmm.
So he was also kind of like, he was used.
Yeah.
He was sabotaged. And so she's trying to get at him to kill him. And the players have to stop her. And at one point, Celine basically scoops the child with a flamethrower, with the flamethrower mouth, and wants to use it as a weapon. And I'm not going to tell you who it was at our table, but someone at our table was not comfortable with this sequence. And we're like, okay, we're not going to do that. I personally thought it was hilarious, but someone at my table didn't want it, and I was like, you don't need to explain yourself to me. Yep. We're not going there.
That's fine. It's so easy to just be like, with game of make-believe, folks. If some path makes someone uncomfortable, just make believe a different path. I know, like, especially, it's so amazing to me to see it, because it's like, you don't have skin in the game that right? And there's no skin in the game that you make people uncomfortable. You can just change it to a different make-believe.
And you know what's also great about this? You know what this caused to happen at the table? Did this hurt anyone's fun?
Nope.
Not a damn bit.
If you need,
everyone still had fun.
I will tell you right now, flamethrower baby or toddler as a weapon is a solid idea that I absolutely love personally. But I also respect someone being like, because it interfaces with children. Not a huge fan, because that child didn't choose to be that way, and now you're using them in a way that they also wouldn't choose. I see where the logic happens. I don't need to see it, but I see where it happens. I see how you can get there. I respect it. But like, that being said, it'd be so hilarious if that had caused a conflict, because the situation would be like, no, I need to do this, and it's like, what about all the other things you've done during this session? Like, this session is not a video game where you try to pick up the most toddlers to use them as weapons. It's you do tons of things, so there's no hill that needs to be died on that makes someone uncomfortable. You just move on to a different part of the game. The thing that makes them uncomfortable, and DMs do this all the time, but DMs step in it all the time. I've stepped in it all the time, where it's like, I'll start on a story track, and then I'll realize, because I don't have a lot of barriers, that I've gone into a weird place, which is why safety tools are super important, into a dramatic and traumatic place, and everything like that, and then I peel it back. Like, then it's just got to be peeled it back. But like,
this is a message I'm going to send to all DMs out there. You are going to encounter problems like this.
Oh yeah, all day.
You are going to encounter a scenario where something may seem fun and someone may be uncomfortable, and you may not necessarily get why they're uncomfortable. Or you may totally get it, but still feel like but it's not that bad. It's okay. It's not that bad.
Yeah.
But you know what? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you think it's not that bad. It doesn't matter. If someone doesn't want it at your table,
they don't get it.
The correct response is to just be like, we're going to move away from this. We're just going to not do that.
It is deeply, deeply a serious thing. And it's why things like the checklist at the beginning of campaigns, or the primer that Brandon mentioned, which is an amazing idea for someone coming into an existing or established campaign, is so necessary, because you can avoid bigger topics of those. They can still come up, but you're going to avoid bigger topics by going through what at the time might seem like an exhaustive and unnecessary checklist. But oh man, is it nice not to be at a table. Like, I am not, like, there's only a few things that really bother me at a table. But as I've gotten older and older, I genuinely don't need human merchandise in my world. It's fine if it exists at a table. I just don't need to interface with it too directly. I'm okay with understanding that in the background, depending on the situation and how bad the bad people are, if it exists. But like, in my mind, I'm like, we already have capitalism, and that's pretty oppressive as it is. You can just use that. But like human merchandise, not a huge fan. Now, I have variations on it. I know some people don't like vampires because that is very similar, and I totally get that. I myself am fine with that because I see it as human food. I don't like servants because there's already, again, D&D especially, it's like you have constructs, you have like unthinking things that you can make into servants, you have zombies, right? Like, why do you need this? But like, and then there are some people that don't even like that because of their things, and I get that. I myself not super comfortable with it, but that is the kind of thing that I think is really obvious to add as question 0. Asking if someone has a phobia of bugs, not spiders, arachnophobia is on everyone, but just bugs in general, right? Roaches, scorpions, things like that. Asking that's a classic DM thing, to have a bunch of bugs in a cave or something like that. And you're not going to know that about every player you play with. So you got to get those questions, and you got to let people know really what the vibe of your world is, what kind of serious content is in it, and be ready to still screw up and accidentally be like, oh, I didn't know that this was a bad thing for you, and I'm sorry, let's move forward. No, we'll move away.
That's why I write a primer to kind of like explain a bit, because like sometimes I want to run a game that's like really open-ended, like really easy to play, really lighthearted, and sometimes I don't. Sometimes I want to run something very specific. And what a primer is when you're inviting people to your game, you could be like, hey, I want to run this campaign, and I think you would be good for it, but this is how I'm going to run it. If this feels like a good fit, you can read it, and if you feel like it's a good fit, join. If it doesn't feel like a good fit, this is not a good game for you. And that's part about like building building a game with intent. Some games you kind of just start off and you feel out where the game goes based on the player's actions, and other games you can start off with intent as a DM, where you're like, I'm going to put up this framework, and you can put up this framework and then let other people be like, that looks like a game for me, or that's not the game for me, I'm going to go look elsewhere for a game. And that way, if you as a DM do want to run that certain type of game, that may be going towards obviously I don't think it's always like, there's certain topics that you should just avoid entirely,
but like it may have some traumatizing things and stuff like that.
But yeah, like for example, when I ran Curse of Strahd, I was like, there's going to be dark shit in this. I want to make a horrifying game. I want to make a game that shocks you, and I want to be able to go there. Okay. Yeah. So if you're coming to my table, there's a list of things that I'm not going to do. I'm not going to do essay or anything like that. But and I'm not going to do like direct violence towards children on my screen, but I might have implied it.
Yep.
You know. And those kind of things. It's like, if that's not something you want at your table, if that's not something you want in your game, and the DM is clearly communicating that, then you can be like, this isn't the right table for me, I'm going to look elsewhere.
And that benefits both player and DM every time. Yes. Because DMs want players that want to play the game they want to run, and players want to play games that they want run for them.
So a red flag for me would be a DM trying to convince you to be okay with the shit that you don't want to be
that's
okay
a walk away. That's a walk away. So we've been streaming for a couple hours, so we're gonna wrap it up here for a bit. 100%. This is completely relevant of nothing, but I don't mind mentioning it. 100% understand the comment about even in video games with vampires stuff or human merchandise stuff, where it's like even in a video games, if there's a mechanic in there, it makes you not want to play it. Definitely understandable. Tons of rule breakers for me. Arguably, maybe more for me in video games than there are for tabletop, only because I'm weirdly inverted about that kind of stuff. But nonetheless, so when we're talking about homebrew, and we're talking about game procedure, and we're talking about rules at the table, and we're talking about session zeros and primers and like rule of cool and all the things that are not written in the rules on how to do it exactly what's in the world, and you're not adhering to exactly the lore in the world and everything like that. The key that we're talking about is really finding ways that you as a GM, DM, storyteller like running your games, and finding ways that your players can be confident that they will also like the things that you do at the table, because that's all that it is. Whether it's like little nudge mechanics because you like it as a GM, and the people at your table are like, yeah, we also are at least neutral to very good, somewhere in that range on that mechanical change. And it's the same thing with content, whether it's lore or
different like problematic players that we could probably have talked about. But
we'll talk about problematic players and how I used to be one at a different time. But yeah, and so that's the goal. The goal is to get everyone playing and having fun together and introducing. So when it comes to introducing home rules as a GM, DM, storyteller, feel free to introduce them. Maybe your players have some homebrew stuff that they might be interested in introducing, and especially early game, early session, or before a one-shot or a two-shot or short campaign. Talk about that stuff, because that stuff is fun. It's what gives the game flavor. It's what makes it more playable for everybody that's currently playing, and you can get agreement on it. You can get things, you can either be upfront and get people that want it, that join the game, or when you pitch it later, say, hey, I'm going to try this, everyone good with it, get agreement on it, make the game better, because no game is perfect in the publish, ever. No game is perfect in the publish, because it can't be, because it's about playing with different groups of people and what they want, right? And so they're just picking shit. And so homebrew away, use those rules, steal from other people at your home games, because you're not costing anyone any money for stealing. Brandon, what is the worst homebrew idea you can think of off the top of your head that is not like traumatizing? What's a bad homebrew idea to go out?
Don't allow the chef class from DM's Guild into your game.
Don't allow it. Don't allow it.
Don't allow it. It is practically a joke amongst people on DM's Guild, because it's a brokenly overpowered class.
Yeah, don't allow it.
The chef. So don't allow it. Don't allow the chef at your table.
This is one for me. Don't. If you're playing Dungeons and Dragons, do not ban a class outright because people who have played that class previously have played it poorly at you, have upset you.
That I just was like, ban this class, and then you're just like, don't ban a class because it's played poorly.
and so you can ban that class. You can ban that class because it is overpowered and it will break your game. That is a mechanical problem. But if you ban a class because every bard player that you've ever played with has bothered you as a player, then that is not about the class. That is about the player. They would have bothered you as a rogue. They would have bothered you as a paladin. They would have bothered you as a wizard. Do not do that. The only reason you should ban a class is because it mechanically does not work in the game that you're playing. You can't. It goes against the world, or because it is in fact a barbarian and they are broken. No, it's barbarian. No, the only reason to ban a class is because it does not work in the mechanical world that you have defined and your players have agreed on to. That is it. Or it mechanically breaks your world because it is too overpowered and it's a homebrew class. You can ban homebrew classes in general because they are too complicated for you to keep track of and you're not confident. But if it's because other players have played that class before and they were jerks to you, and they also you played with two jerky bards, let's be honest, bards in the past, you shouldn't.
Someone's had a bad experience with bards.
I as a player that ends up playing a bard in regardless of class, I have had many a bad experience. But for Brandon, for myself, this has been Questboard Gaming. You can go to questboardgaming.com. Maybe the site will be up. The domain is registered to us, but maybe the site will be up. And you will eventually be able to find Questboard Gaming on all podcast sites under Questboard Gaming, where you consume podcasts and such. Thank you for joining us. Thank the chat, and you all have a wonderful afternoon, evening of tabletop homebrew. Don't ban bards. Don't ban bards at your table. Then I can't play at your table. Don't ban bards.
Also, we love Remy, by the way. We love Remy. No hate against Remy at all.
No hate against Remy. No hate. No, Remy and Through the Mill is 100% golden. Good bard energy. Great bard energy. All right.